conversations with the young people in your lives in whatever capacity that may be. I do have some time at the end for a bit of a Q&A as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to stick around to ask those. But I'll also, be covering a few of the top questions that we hear from parents and youth workers at the moment. So fingers crossed we'll get through everything today. But yeah, please stick around and ask any questions that you have at the end. So I'll be chatting over the affirmative consent legislative updates, why these conversations are important, talk a bit about disclosures and navigating the tricky conversations, and then of course leave some time for a Q&A at the end. So as Tony said, my name is Laura Crozier and I'm the Affirmative Consent Project Officer at YACVIC, which is the Youth Affairs Council of Victoria. I run a project called YENA, which is affirmative consent education for young people by young people. And as Tony said, it started here in the Mallee. It's now a statewide project, but it was designed and delivered originally by Mallee young people. So the reason this project came about was due to the legislative updates made to Victorian law on the definition of consent and how consent is dealt with in our legal system. So I thought I'd start today by giving you the rundown on those updates. So the new affirmative consent model is all about promoting that sexual consent cannot be assumed and someone does not consent because they didn't say no or physically resist. Affirmative consent involves ongoing and mutual communication. So the ways in which the definition of consent have changed in a legal sense is that it is now a free and voluntary agreement instead of just a free agreement. This is to reinforce that involuntary bodily responses are not an indication of consent. Involuntary bodily responses could include things like getting an erection, moaning, or gasping. Again, that doesn't indicate consent. It is just something that our bodies do. The next change to the legislation and the definition of consent is that a person does not consent merely because they do not resist either physically or verbally. So this moves away from that outdated notion that a lack of consent is based on the amount of resistance rather than something that is positively communicated between two people. So it brings back that idea of enthusiastic consent. Final change to the definition of consent is that if a person does not consent just because of past sexual behaviours. So like we've spoken about, it emphasises that consent can't be assumed based on past sexual behaviours, including if they've previously consented to a sexual act with the same or a different person. All these changes to consent are a really positive step forward when it comes to how consent is talked about in the law, and it's something that we really love to see. But it also encourages a social change in society where victims and survivors aren't blamed for what has happened to them, and that the focus is shifted to what the person using sexual violence did or did not do to check for consent. One of the other big changes to the legislation Victoria is the introduction of laws around stealthing. Now, stealthing is the intentional non-use, tampering or removal of a condom without the permission or knowledge of the other people involved. So the new legislative updates have made stealthing a circumstance in which there was no consent given and is an act of sexual violence. Under the new reforms, if consent was given on the basis of a condom being used, but then the condom was intentionally not used, removed or tampered with before or during sex, that is now illegal and considered an act of sexual violence. So as a part of the YENA project, one of the things that we wanted to deliver on was creating resources for young people by young people. So our entire workshop is designed in that manner, but we also delivered a few resources that featured young people front and centre, and this video is one of them.
Stealthing is the intentional non-use, tampering or removal of a condom during sexual activity without the consent of the person or people involved.
So they went home together?
Yeah, but did you hear what happened? They got an STI.
Surely they used a condom.
Well, they did, but when she messaged him to ask about it, he said he took it off halfway through. Pretty messed up.
That can't be legal.
It's not. In fact, in the state of Victoria, stealthing is now regarded as an act of sexual violence.
I hooked up with this girl on the weekend. She wanted me to use a condom, but I took it off when she wasn't looking. Felt way better.
You took it off without her knowing?
Yeah.
That's pretty sketchy. I'm pretty sure it's illegal.
If a person agrees to sex with a condom and you remove it without their knowledge, then you haven't gotten consent. It's not just an unethical thing to do, it's now illegal.
So that is just one of a series of videos that was created as a part of the YENA project, and features local Mallee young people. I remember when we were first kind of brainstorming this idea, I thought, oh my goodness, there is no way that we're going to get young people to act in this video. And I was blown away by the caliber of and the quality of that video. Like, I couldn't believe the energy that those young people brought to our day of filming. It was just fantastic. So, and they're banging down our doors saying, we want to be in more videos, we want to do more. So it's been a really incredible experience to kind of have those young people get so engaged in this conversation. And hopefully we'll be doing some more work with them shortly. So one of the really big things I want to talk to you all about today is why it's so important that we have these conversations. I know it can be daunting, and for many different reasons. Maybe it's because we don't think that the young people in our lives are having sex or engaging in intimate relationships in any way, so we don't need to talk about it. Maybe we're worried that if we bring it up, it's encouraging that behavior. Maybe we're just nervous because it's awkward and uncomfortable. Or maybe you didn't feel like you had the best education on consent and sexual health, so how the heck are you meant to be able to talk about it? There's so many different reasons, and all of them are completely valid. So I wanted to kind of talk through some of the things that kind of highlight why it's important, and then we can talk about how we can actually have those conversations. So I think one of the most important things for people to know is that educating young people on consent, sex, and sexual health is not encouraging young people to have sex. This is a really big fear that I hear from parents and carers, and one that I'm happy to put to ease. The Australian Secondary Students and Sexual Health Survey that's run by La Trobe University details it actually does the opposite. So rather than talking about this and encouraging young people to have sex, it actually kind of slows down the process. As humans, we're naturally curious, and the same goes for young people, that curiosity about sex and relationships, especially when denied access to more information, will actually only lead to young people seeking to find more ways to engage in that behavior, and that could be harmful or dangerous. So when we have these conversations, what we're doing is actually kind of easing that curiosity and ensuring that young people have access to information that they're curious about, which will then actually mean that they don't feel the need to kind of go out and engage in that behavior because they know more information already. The reality is, at the end of the day, that young people are going to have sex. We can't stop that. But what we can do is inform them how to do it safely, how to ensure that they're taking care of themselves and the other person or people involved, that they know where to go to get help and have a safe space to talk about it. And ultimately, by doing this, we'll actually address some of the curiosity, which will result in them hopefully waiting and putting off that experience, at least for a little while. The other big reason that it's so important we're having these conversations is to contribute to the prevention of violence. Learning how to set our own boundaries and understanding why it's important to respect others, even when it's not intimacy related, is vital information that all people need to know and understand. The sooner we start engaging in those conversations with young people in our lives about respecting boundaries in whatever context, the better outcomes we're going to have. Now, it's easy to say all that, but I'm very aware that there's many, many barriers to young people receiving this education, especially in rural communities like the Mallee. Whether it be lack of capacity for schools to deliver their education meaningfully or in a way that's culturally safe and age appropriate. We also know that there's a lack of comfortability in accessing services as well. Young people don't feel comfortable going to the doctors to talk about their sexual health because, you know, the receptionist is their mum's friend's cousin and they don't trust that their parents aren't going to find out about it. They don't feel comfortable going to the pharmacy and asking for the morning after pill because they've never once walked in there and not seen someone that they know. They can't buy condoms from Woolies because, you know, their mate's stocking shelves down the aisle and it's just uncomfortable for everyone involved. So we know that there's a lot of barriers to young people accessing the information and accessing services about sexual health and consent. But it also, that those barriers kind of reiterate why it's so vital for these conversations to really be a community effort. We shouldn't only rely on in-school education, but all that pressure also shouldn't be put on parents and carers at home. It's more nuanced than a one and done conversation, but being equipped and prepared to engage in these conversations is a really fantastic place to start. So when we talk about consent and sexual violence, something that's obviously really important to touch on is disclosures. Now, I will just note that depending on kind of where you're joining from today, there are different kind of laws and policies that different people have to abide by. So, you know, if you're a mandatory reporter, that's kind of different. But where I'm really coming from today is kind of a community aspect, parents and carers, what to do if a young person discloses sexual violence to you. So the Australian Institute of Family Studies have recently updated their resource surrounding responding to children and young people's disclosures of abuse. And they have this quite simple 3-step process that they've put together in this poster. I'll also make sure that the link to their page on this is sent out, where they go more in depth about the process of responding to disclosures, but this puts it quite simply, and it's a digestible kind of format to engage with as well. Those 3 steps are listen, reassure, and respect. So 3 really important kind of key words to remember when talking about disclosures. So listening, we want to move to a suitable environment free of distractions. So we really want to use our active listening skills there. It's important to be calm and patient and allow time for the child or young person to be heard and let that young person use their own words. So it's really important that we avoid asking leading questions or quizzing them about details of the abuse. We don't want to kind of inject ourselves into the story. We want them to use their own words and allow that to come naturally. Then we want to reassure that young person that they're doing the right thing by telling you what's happened. Reassure them that you believe them as well, and that make sure that they know that they've been heard and they're believed. Reassure them that they're not at fault and not the cause of any distress that you, as the person they're talking to, or other people in the community may feel. And then address any concerns about the child or young person's safety. And then the final aspect of their framework is respect. Respect that the child or young person may only reveal some details and you're not entitled to anything that they don't feel comfortable revealing. Acknowledge that young person's bravery and strength for talking about something that is so difficult, and avoid making any promises that you can't keep. So really important that, we don't kind of set an expectation that they're gonna that's eventually going to fall through. What we really want to make sure when we do have disclosures from young people is that they feel heard, but that it's also realistic in what the process is going to look like. And tell the child or young person what you plan to do next. So again, that will differ for people who have to undertake mandatory reporting protocols, but yeah, just keep it very honest and open. I'm going to show another video that was developed with some young people, featuring some young people from Robinvale. Again, I think I say this about every video, but I really do think this one is one of my favorites. And this is a video that was designed for young people on what to do if their friend discloses an act of sexual violence to them. So it's not necessarily directly relevant to you as parents and carers or youth workers, but I think it's still quite an impressive video, and I think that at the heart of it, it still applies. So the young people that worked on this project came up with a 5-step process for what to do if a friend discloses to you, and then created this video.
Over 95% of sexual violence disclosures turn out to be true. If someone discloses an act of sexual violence to you, knowing how to respond to them, support, and understand can make a significant difference to their recovery.
You're right. Is something up because seem a bit off.
Honestly, I don't really know. Something happened, but I'm not sure. And I don't know what to.
Step 1, find a safe space.
Did you want to go somewhere more quiet and talk about it?
Yeah. I don't really know where to start.
It's all right. You can just tell me what you're comfortable with.
Step 2, actively listen to what your friend is saying. When your friend is disclosing their experience, it's important. Avoid distractions and interruptions. Make eye contact and nod along to show that you're listening. It's also important to make sure that this conversation is focused on them. Don't try to relate to their experience by talking about your own life or asking lots of questions about. Step 3, believe what you've been told. When someone has disclosed the experience to you, it's important to show that you believe them and validate them. The experience could sound like.
That sounds really hard, and I'm so sorry that you've been through that. I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been. No one should have to go through that. What happened was not your fault.
Step 4, reach out.
You don't have people out there that you can talk to about this, like professionals. I can help you look into it if it's something that you want to do.
Yeah, okay, I guess it can't hurt to know what's it.
Getting they might need some time to think about their options, and that's okay. Regardless, it's good to know what services are available to you if you do decide.
This happened to me the other day, and I've been really upset and stressed about it, and I really don't know what to do.
Services are available no matter how long ago the sexual violence has occurred. If someone is in immediate danger, you can contact 000 or speak to someone you trust. Assistance. Hearing about someone experiencing a trauma can also be emotional for you. Remember, taking care of yourself is just take the time to do something that makes you feel good and boosts your mental health.
I'm definitely biased, but I really love it. I think it really encapsulates how important that process is, but it also really shows like what young people are capable of as well. And I think that that last step about taking care of yourself is so important, especially I think regardless of how old you are or what space that you work in, I think it's really important that we take the time to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves when we hear something that can be so distressing. So yeah, I really love that video, and I hope you do as well. So navigating the tricky stuff. It's an interesting conversation and one that I love engaging in, I'm not going to lie. So I will do my best to kind of give you my best tips and tricks for having the tricky conversations. And I'm not a parent. I'm a young person, and I, have definitely kind of been on the other side, I suppose, of being the young person that causes the tricky conversations. So maybe that's helpful in kind of giving you the other perspective. But yeah, anyways, I think when it comes to these conversations that you have with the young people in your life, the best thing that you can do is be honest. Now, a lot of the time I have kind of parents talking to me and saying, I really want to make sure that I tell them the right thing. And sometimes I stress myself out so much that I just won't talk to them at all. And I think that's a very normal response, but probably not the best one, solely because we want to make sure that we're encouraging these conversations so that young people know that they can talk to us about this sort of stuff. And I think my best advice is that not knowing the answers is actually really okay, but just be upfront about it. I think a lot of the time young people will actually respect you for that honesty. They'll respect you for letting them know that, hey, I actually don't know the answer to this question that you're asking, but if you give me some time, I can look into it and then we can kind of discuss it together. I don't think that it's important to kind of be an expert in the topic. I think it's really just important that we're honest about the fact that we're all on a learning curve, and it's really okay not to have the answer, but going about finding the correct response is a really, really powerful thing to do. Yeah, I think it's definitely something young people will respect you for if you can admit when you don't know. So in terms of kind of delivering a workshop on consent to young people, we often get a lot of really funny questions, and it can be hard not to respond by just laughing along with young people, because, like, honestly, it's hilarious sometimes and it's hard. But one of the things I've realized is that young people often use humor to kind of navigate their uncomfortability. A lot of the time, this is their curiosity coming to the surface. I feel like a lot of the time when talking about consent with young people, especially in a group setting, there's always kind of one or two people that might really play up. They're so uncomfortable, so they make jokes and they try to catch you out and trip you up and, you know, call you out on your wording of something. And, you know, it works sometimes. And I think the response can often be to try and shut that behavior down, when really I think it's actually important that we lean into that, because often those people that are making such disturbance are the ones that are the most curious and the least educated. They actually have the most questions, and sometimes they just don't know how to ask them without feeling really uncomfortable or anxious. So they'll do it in a way that makes them feel comfortable, and that's humor, or it's, you know, making a joke out of it. I've been asked some pretty kind of ludicrous questions over the years. And, you know, a lot of them might even seem quite straightforward, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that whilst it might seem like common sense, a lot of the time it's not to these young people, especially if, like, in these rural communities like the Mallee, that have really diverse culture, that sometimes, you know, they've opted out of so much education because it's not delivered in a way that's culturally safe in school. So they just haven't ever had that education. So I think it's important that we really kind of roll with it a little bit when these questions are asked. You know, I've been asked things like, is it illegal to have sex with my friend's mum? I mean, context, people, come on. Like, is it illegal? It depends on your age. Technically, it might not be. Is it ethical? That's a whole nother conversation that we need to be having. So kind of roll with that and have that conversation. You know, I've been asked, if I'm having sex with a girl and my mate taps in, that's cool, yeah? I'm like, well, did she consent to your mate tapping in? You know, like, that's actually not. If you don't talk about it, that makes it rape. But let's talk about it. How could we make it a consensual act? There's lots of ways that we can go about it. So one of the important things, though, is that, like, in a workshop, if we're delivering to young people, we never claim to be lawyers or experts in the law in any way. I'm no way an expert in the law. However, I will always do my best to answer these questions. And if I can't answer it, I will definitely dedicate time to finding out. And again, just coming back to that kind of honesty is, I actually don't know the answer to that one, but let me get back to you. I understand that. I think one of the most valuable things is probably going to be how we navigate these conversations in a really practical sense. So I've come up with a couple of scenarios, and I'll kind of walk through how I might respond to them, and hopefully that's helpful. So this first scenario that I've come up with is, you overhear your daughter and her friends talking. One of her friends mentions that she's dating a new guy, but he's much older than them. He's 22, while your daughter and her friends are only 16. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one because the age of consent in Victoria is 16. So technically not a legal issue. However, what we do want to consider when we see a scenario like this is this an ethical problem that we should be addressing with the young people in our lives? I think the best way to kind of approach a conversation like this is just having a bit of a casual a conversation with your daughter. It's not about kind of making anybody feel like they've done anything wrong, but allowing the young people in your lives to feel like there's an open path of communication there if they need it. So, saying, hey, I overheard that, so-and-so has a new boyfriend. That's cool. What's going on there? And hopefully she opens up to you a little bit, oh, he's a bit older than us, which is a bit weird, but, they seem happy. And then opening up that path of communication, saying, oh, that is a bit weird that he's so much older. Have you guys ever spoken about consent, and do you know the laws and all of that? And just kind of allow the space for that conversation to take place quite naturally. And I think when it comes down to scenarios like this, it's actually really important that maybe you aren't forcing that information on them, but what you are doing is creating an environment that they know that they can come to you if things go pear-shaped. So they know that they'll be safe to come to you. If things do go wrong at any point, they have someone to go to, and that's really, really important. This next scenario, I think, is something that is quite prevalent in society at the moment, and something that a lot of young men are probably experiencing. Alex, 17, has just gotten into his first relationship with a girl from school. One day he comes to you to express that he's worried about taking things further with her because he's so afraid of doing the wrong thing. With all the media coverage and discourse online regarding sexual violence and toxic masculinity, he is anxious that anything he does, even consensually, is going to be misconstrued and turned against him. He is unsure how to make sure that he does the right thing by himself and his partner when they do eventually take the next step. I think in the world of Andrew Tate and extreme kind of activists online, it can be really, really hard to navigate that discourse as a young person. And I think that young men kind of continuously being told that they're doing the wrong thing can be really, really harmful. So I think it's really important that we allow space for these conversations. And I think if a young person comes to you and says, I'm really worried that I'm not doing the right thing, and I need to know that I can kind of navigate this space and it's not going to be turned against me, then the best thing that we can do is understand the education ourselves. So go back to those kind of 3 things that I mentioned earlier about the changes in legislation. Are you making sure that, you have consent in the moment? Are you making sure that she feels comfortable and that you feel comfortable? When we do our workshops, we do an activity which is based on an ethical consent framework, which was developed by the Hum Academy and a researcher named Jenny Walsh. So her ethical consent framework takes into account 4 pillars of consent. The first one being taking care of myself. The second, taking care of the other person. The third is power dynamics. And the fourth is learning as we go. So number 1, taking care of myself. Am I feeling safe in this environment? Am I ready for this experience? Do I feel comfortable? Do I feel like this is a safe environment? Checking in with myself to make sure that this is what I want, that it's not peer pressure or anything else. It's what I want. Number 2, checking in with the other person, making sure that they feel safe. Hey, does this feel good? Are you comfortable? Is there anything I can do to make you feel more comfortable? Are you sure you want this to happen right now? Do you like it when I touch you here? Does this feel good for you? Actually making sure that there's enthusiastic consent and that both parties are enjoying it. The third one is power dynamics, and we talk a lot about different power dynamics in everyday relationships, whether it be between yourself and a landlord or yourself and your sports coach, but then also in intimate relationships. So with you and your partner, are there power dynamics at play there? And I think that that's always a really interesting conversation to have, and young people are really fantastic at kind of picking up on the power dynamics that are at play in different relationships and navigating kind of how to even the playing field and even out the power, and to make sure that people feel safe. So that's always a really kind of insightful activity that we do, but a really important one as well. And it gives young people the opportunity to make sure that they feel like they can identify when they have the power in a scenario, but also identify when they feel like they don't have as much power, and what they can do to make sure that they feel safer. And then that final pillar of the ethical consent framework is learning as we go. People are going to make mistakes, and it's actually okay. And it's really what we do with those mistakes that matters. And so I think that if I was kind of approached by a young man who was feeling this way, like Alex is in this scenario, that I would really go over that framework with him, because the best thing that he can do is make sure that when they do take the next step with their partner, he feels safe, she feels safe, power dynamics are addressed, and that they can learn together as they kind of go through that experience. That's really important. So that's kind of that ethical consent framework that I think will be really beneficial to a lot of young people, and is something that we try to teach as much as possible. All righty. So I've put here a few questions that are kind of the top questions that we're being asked by parents and carers and workers and anyone that we kind of bump into along the way. So am I really the best person to talk with my kids about consent, and what age should I start that conversation? I know that sometimes the answer you want is no, you're not the best person to talk about consent with your kids. I know that's the answer that some people have wanted, because they don't want to have that conversation with their kids because it's uncomfortable. And I totally get that. But unfortunately, I do think you are the best person to have that conversation. So sorry. But I do think that it's really important that if you are a parent or a carer, that the young people, that your kids feel comfortable coming to you when things are good, because if they can come to you when things are good, then it also means they'll probably feel comfortable to come to you when things are bad. And that's what we really want. We want people to feel safe to let people know when there has been a mistake and when things have kind of gone the wrong way, and feel comfortable to get advice and to get the right support that they need to make sure that that works out in the best case scenario. In terms of what age that conversation should start, I don't really think that there's a particular age that is best. I think a lot of people kind of hear the word consent and think, oh, that's about sex. And it's not. Like, it doesn't have to be about sex at all. So I think that the conversation can actually probably start a lot earlier than you think. Even myself kind of working in this space, I have primarily worked with kind of high school students and high school aged young people. So kind of for me, it's kind of been 14 and above. And I even kind of thought, like, I wouldn't know how to have that conversation with somebody younger than that. I wouldn't know how to engage in that conversation with a primary age student. But I recently got to see Sexual Health Victoria deliver a workshop with some primary age students. And the way that they were talking about consent, it was really about kind of bodily autonomy. So identifying body parts and using the correct language, and being able to identify, you know, when a situation would be wrong. And one of the examples, that one of the scenarios that they used was that, you know, you were playing games online, and you met somebody and they asked to kind of start messaging privately, and then they asked to meet up. How would you go about, like, what do we want to look out for in this kind of situation? And all of the kids in that room were able to pick up that, no, if like someone's asking to talk to you privately and that you don't tell mum and dad, then that's probably a bad sign. So I think it's really incredible how equipped young people are to actually respond to these conversations that we have, even when we think that they might not be. So I think just opening up the lines of communication, you know, not forcing your kids to hug their grandparents or their aunts and uncles just because that's kind of the social norm. Allowing them to have bodily autonomy in those moments could be really important in kind of leading the conversations around consent and opening up that dialogue between you and your children. Another question that we get is, can I reduce the toxic load of online or social media? For example, limit time online or the access to the internet. I think that whilst it might be a good-hearted initiative to do that, it's probably not the best response, because young people are resourceful. I will tell you that much. When I was preparing for this webinar, and looking at this question, I thought, oh, I understand the want to do it, but I promise you that if we set boundaries or like strict rules, that young people will probably work their way around it. And that's kind of my whole conversation about the discussions around consent and sexual health, is that if we limit those conversations, then young people are just going to be more and more curious. And so then they'll find out ways to get that information regardless of you wanting them to have it or not. That's why teaching abstinence doesn't work, because young people get curious and then they go and engage in intimate relationships in a more harmful way that leads to STIs and pregnancies and all these things that we want to kind of teach young people how to avoid at that age, if that's what they're wanting to do. So I would say that whilst you probably can't reduce the toxic load of what's available online, because there is a lot of it, I think again it's really about opening up the pathways of communication. If you have a young person and they come up to you and start talking to you about Andrew Tate and how he's the GOAT and he's kind of the best thing since sliced bread, maybe that's time that you bring up the conversation to talk about why do you agree with what Andrew Tate's saying, and why is he resonating with you? Because you know he's kind of got some harmful views. So let's talk about it. Let's have that conversation together and kind of work through it together. I know that my mum once banned me from using my phone, and she then was very angry when she found out that my friend had a spare iPad that I had borrowed for the time that I was banned from using my phone. So we are resourceful, unfortunately, us young people, very sneaky occasionally. The other question, is it a good idea to segregate these conversations based on gender? It's not necessarily best practice to segregate the conversations, but there is a time and a place for it. If segregating those conversations between and having men's and women's business is going to mean that the education is culturally appropriate, then absolutely we'll do that to make sure that people can access the information and the education. I think that it's better delivered when we aren't kind of separating it solely because it's not just a man's issue and it's not just a girl's issue, but you know, if it's the only thing that's going to work, then that's also okay. So that's kind of where I was going to wrap it up for today. I hope that I have been informative in some ways. I did just want to mention that the Now workshop that I've mentioned a few times today is currently funded and is completely free for rural and regional communities. So we aren't funded to deliver in schools, but if you have a youth group or a sporting club or think that a public session would work well, then we are so keen to hear from you about how we could make a workshop work in your community. We would love to come and see you. So please feel free to give that QR code a scan. and yeah, put an inquiry in and I will reach out to you to see what we can organize. Or if you just want more information on the workshop, that's also just, yeah, fill out that form and I will send you all the information that I have. There's also just a survey. Tony has sent that in the chat as well about today's webinar. So if you could fill that out as well, we would be very, very grateful. Thank you, Stephanie from the SMEC. It's been a pleasure to already have delivered the workshops at SMEC. So that's very exciting. Great to have you here. I would also just like to share a few things about about YACVIC. So we have this YPPN, which is the Youth Participation Practice Network, which is a community of practice for anyone that works with young people in the youth sector. And there's regular meetings there and lots of opportunities that go out through that for workers and for young people as well. So that's an opportunity as well. But yeah, please reach out if you have any questions. Tony's going to send out all the resources that I've mentioned today, as well as some extra ones that I think will be helpful, including a service, like recommendations of services in the area as well. So if at any point there is any need for those, you have access to that information. I'm more than happy to kind of stick around for the next 10 to 15 minutes. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to either put them in the chat or put your mic on and ask, and I'll answer to the best of my ability.
Thanks so much, Laura. So amazing to have a young person who's worked with young people in the Mallee spend some time with us to start the conversation. I found that super useful, and yeah, we'll gather all that information that you went through and we'll send it out to everyone as well. So we'll wait around to see if there's any questions. Laura, are you coming here anytime soon? Did I hear you were coming to TAFE? Is that?
I am. I will actually be in Mildura in 2 weeks' time, I believe. So, the COP.
Are you seeing those questions? Yeah.
Yep. So for a session in a sporting club, what age members would you recommend? We are pretty flexible with the delivery on ages, so we can kind of deliver from 12 to 25, and we altered the content a little bit based on the particular group we're delivering to. But if you were to ask about my kind of sweet spot, then I would say that it's probably between 14 and up, kind of 14, 15, 16 is ideal. But like any age is great. I think in a sporting club for a junior club, then yeah, that probably under 15s and under 16s would be fantastic. Who are we linking with when attending Mildura? So this trip, when we come up to Mildura, we're going to be attending some workshops at Sunny TAFE, which is going to be fantastic. But we are very open to coming up and doing another Mildura trip. If anybody wanted to catch up for a coffee or anything while I'm in Mildura, I'll definitely find the time to do that as well. If you wanted to reach out and let me know, that's totally an option, and we can chat through some other ideas. I believe that's Sunraysia Community Health Service, if I'm correct with my acronyms. Yeah. I have previously been in touch with Homebase and done a workshop there, but that was a little while ago now. So definitely would be keen to get in touch with them again, or have a chat with you if there's any kind of other groups or young people that you work with that could be interested in a workshop.
How long do the workshops go for, Laura?
They're 90 minutes. So, and an interactive workshop with activities and all the fun stuff to make it as engaging as possible.
Melanie said was thinking of linking you in with the health promotion team at Sunraysia Community Health.
Yeah, that would be amazing, Melanie. I'll put my email in the chat for you. And I've just chucked my phone number in there as well if anyone prefers that. Part of the health promotion team. Oh, amazing. That would be lovely. I'd love to catch up with you. If you want to shoot me an email or a text, then we can possibly organise a time while I'm in Mildura.
And which young people would be delivering the sessions here? Would they be people from around the Mallee, or do they
have
come from elsewhere as well?
They come from kind of all over Victoria at the moment.
Yeah.
So we've got a group of peer facilitators here at YACVIC that are located from all different regions of Victoria. Some are from Gippsland, we've got some from Albury-Wodonga, from Warrnambool, and some from the Mallee as well. So it kind of depends on availability. But this workshop is particularly special in the Mallee because it was developed with Mallee young people. So makes it extra special when we get to come back there.
When does the Youth Participation Network run? How often is that one, and what's the sort of arrangements with that?
Off the top of my head, I believe that runs, there's a Zoom meeting and community practice maybe every 2 months, but they also have a kind of email chain thing. I don't know what you call it, like a Google group thing. And so opportunities get sent out through there. So there's often opportunities for young people to engage in focus groups or job opportunities for young people, stuff like that. Lots of opportunities go out through that network, and it's a really great way to kind of connect with different services and such and workers across the state.
Okay, I think the questions of Janine, did you have any questions you wanted to ask Laura?
No, I think I've asked enough questions, Laura. Thank you. Great session. Appreciated it.
Thank you. Thanks everyone so much for coming. Really appreciate it. And please reach out if you ever have any questions or anything.